share his presentation and speak on management of refractive surprises.
First of all, thank you, Dr. Anagar, to have asked me to participate in your course. Take the Bull by its Horn is the title of the course. So this is taking the bull. But sometimes you can be taken by the horn of the bull, and both have different endings. So now the question is, how do we go about different case scenarios that we have put ourselves into, and how to solve the problem? So the talk is all about post-op refractive surprise. So this can happen during pre-op, during surgery, special situations, and difficult cases. So we'll discuss each scenario. Now, pre-op is a wrong patient, wrong eye, wrong formula, wrong IOL, wrong A constant, wrong calculation, wrong lens ordered, and wrong entry into the OT list. So mistake can happen at any level. Of course, all of us have our systems in place. An example, a high myope, post-op error, good corneal thickness. One good possibility is to do a surface treatment. So surface treatment is very easy that you can see. I'll just show a little case of surface treatment. Here, there is nothing much to be done. Only data that we really enter inside is the epithelial thickness. So once we enter the epithelial thickness, the entire procedure is a non-contact technique, and the ablation happens by the laser by itself. So this is a very good solution. The pressure of the eye does not go up. There's no question of IOP going up. There's no question of anything happening to the IOL, etc., etc., etc. So this can solve your problem immediately. Coming to pseudophakic patients and the post-op error, and the patient has got a multifocal IOL. Now, as you all might know, that if a patient has undergone LASIK, say 15 years back, today we still go ahead and put a multifocal IOL. So do not have a fear in your mind that if a patient has got a multifocal IOL and a post-op surprise, don't be scared of doing LASIK in such procedures, in such cases, if the corneal thickness is good. So this is a pseudophakic eye, and I'm going ahead and doing LASIK. This was many, many years back. So you can see that many, many years back, we are going ahead and doing this. So this is, again, a pseudophakic eye. You can see the reflection coming from the surface of the IOL. And I have a pendular system where we make a flap, go ahead and do the laser. Once here, it's very important that I put 1 drop of methyl cellulose. Now, because the basement membrane sometimes in some patients is a little weak, it may strip the epithelium. I like to avoid friction on the surface of the cornea, and I put 1 drop of methyl, and that will prevent the friction. Once you put 1 drop of methyl, put your saline, put in the microkeratome, and now just go ahead, lift the flap and do your laser. So you can see the reflection coming from the surface of the eye. Really nothing to worry, excellent results. You can do this after 3 months of stability, and patients are quite happy. So pseudophakic LASIK is quite possible. For patients with multifocality, now suppose we have operated a patient many, many, many years on, and now the patient comes back that you operated my neighbor and he's able to see and read without glasses, so do something for me, and you've done a patient many, many years back, and now what to do? So there are other options that we do is...
Let me show you one more interesting case. A patient has a Technis 1 IOL and wants a multifocality. One option is to put an add-on lens in the sulcus, which is quite possible under topical anesthesia. After the main incision, Xylocard is injected and the viscoelastic is injected under the rhexis margin. This creates the space to put the IOL under the CCC. The Technis 1 is in the bag, and another lens, which is a multifocal lens, can be placed on this IOL in the sulcus. This is a Sulcolex, which is a multifocal IOL, which is then loaded on to the cartridge and with the help of the injector, injected inside the eye. The haptic slowly unfolds and is placed in the sulcus. Notice how the optic can be captured in the CCC margin and is glided or slided below the CCC on the original Technis 1 IOL.
So this is a Sulcoflex, which is a multifocal IOL, which is placed on the original Technis 1 IOL, and that gives multifocality. You can do this only in one eye, and the patients are quite happy. You don't need to do a bilateral procedure for this. Coming to piggy bag, now this is one more option that we have. So the patient has undergone surgery many years back. This was a very interesting case. I'll just pause for a second. 20 years back, patient had some trauma. Post-op is -9 with 1.5, good cell count, keratometry says everything. We had a wavefront analysis. So let's look at how the case actually is seen. Here you can see that the lens is also there. Now question here is what to do. So this are all the readings. I'm not going to show you, but this is how the patient came to me. So you can see a PMMA lens, a displaced IOL. Okay, anterior posterior capsule is stuck. Vitreous is coming from above the IOL. Okay, fibrosis around the haptics. Okay, and worst scenario, iridocapsular adhesions in the periphery. So you can see adhesions. And now we need to do something for this because the -9 patient was actually referred to me for LASIK. But here I decided to go ahead under topical anesthesia, of course, do vitrectomy, remove all this. And now the first thing is, if we want to do Sulcoflex, in this case, it's very important. I made sure that the vitreous is out, that we center the primary IOL. You can see that the primary IOL is decentered. So now what can we do? So what I did was this anterior posterior capsule, which is stuck together, I tried to make a reasonable larger opening for that. And once I made a larger opening with a vitrectomy, so you'll see that I'm doing this. This is a vitrectomy. The anterior posterior capsule, which is adherent to each other, I make a larger opening. Okay. And we have a decentered primary IOL. Now I will use the same dialing hole, which is a larger optic in olden times, and engage it with the capsule. So now that centers my primary IOL. Now I break the capsulocortical adhesions and then go ahead and put a Sulcoflex to neutralize the -9 that was there. You will be surprised in this case, this is a Sulcoflex going in. The cylinder disappeared because I removed the tilt of the primary IOL. So that itself was a great help. So this is another tough case where I put in a piggyback IOL. Now this is another case, old design. Mahipal must have seen these designs, larger optic, dialing holes and post-op error. In such cases, what can you do? You can put a 3-piece IOL on this primary IOL to correct the refractive error. So this is a sensor IOL and we are placing it in the sulcus on the primary IOL. So you can see that a 3-piece can easily be placed in the sulcus and that will correct your spherical refractive error. And this patient, of course, these designs are non-foldable, large optic IOLs available many years back, and patient had post-op refractive error. You can go ahead and correct this too in such a scenario. This is, of course, an intraocular procedure. If the cornea is thin, one can go ahead and apply this procedure. So this just finishes that case. Now, during surgery, what can go wrong is a wrong IOL box given by your staff, confusion in the name. Sometimes you have the same name of 2 patients, so make sure that is taken care of. Wrong make of an IOL, wrong IOL implanted, and value time out. So this is another case where an associate of mine had placed an IOL, and we realized it was not only a wrong IOL, it was placed upside down. If the primary IOL was placed correctly, okay, I would not have worried. I would have done a piggy bag and placed another lens on it. But if your primary IOL is upside down, how do you make out that it's upside down? So you can see that this haptic should have been in this area and the other haptic should have been in this area. So what had actually happened is that IOL had flipped during the surgery. It was placed in the bag, but upside down. So in such a case scenario, we don't have much choice since we know that the error was large. We make a nick and use the same IOL. After cutting the IOL, we use the cut. You don't need to cut through and through. In the olden times, we used to cut through and through. We just make a little cut here. And this cut, we use the same cut as a fulcrum and hold one edge of the optic in an incision, which is about 3.2 millimeters in size, and remove the primary IOL. Once that is done, you know exactly the calculation that was done primarily, and then go ahead and place the actual IOL that was necessary for this patient. So sometimes this can happen, that a wrong IOL with a wrong power in a wrong position can happen in such a case scenario. This is a good option that you may have. Torics, a pentacam not done. If you do any toric IOL without doing a pentacam for your patient, believe me, friends, you can be in real trouble, because the patient had keratoconus, you went and did a toric and the patient is still unhappy and the patient still needs a toric correction. Wrong placement of insertion with the virion. Sheet placement is wrong, wrong manual marking, wrong size CCC, and rotation of the IOL. So torics with intacts of this patient, in fact, was very, very happy. I want to give a take-home message to all of my friends here that if a patient has had intacts and you put a toric IOL, the surgery is very simple. It's just like how we do a routine surgery. The patients get excellent reading vision. So you can see that here I'm going, you have to be careful when you make a keratometry that you don't touch the intacts at all and then go ahead and do your phacoemulsification. In fact, the intact ring itself helps you to do your CCC. Go ahead and do your phacoemulsification and then put in a toric IOL. Because of this patient having keratoconus, steepening of the cornea in the center, we put a toric IOL in the axis necessary. These patients can read beautifully. You would be surprised with a monofocal IOL, they get a depth perception and they can actually read N8 without glasses. So this patient of mine was very, very happy. The last case that I'm going to discuss is RK operated, penetrating keratoplasty, keratoconus cases, post-op, rather refractive cases who undergone LASIK many, many years back as a procedure, and premium IOLs in such scenario. So this is a patient with RK. Remember, my incision is made between two RK cuts. So sometimes we have to place the keratome in front of the two RK cuts and see whether that's enough to give a space. Here you can see that I've done the manual marking to put the toric IOL in an operated patient with RK. Many times you don't get an image-guided Virion image or a Callisto because the cornea is flat in the middle and that does not give you a feedback. If it doesn't give a feedback, you have to do a manual marking and place the toric IOL in the axis of desired direction. So once that is done, we remove the viscoelastic and then just hydrate the wound. Sometimes these wounds do open up, nothing really much to worry, but if that happens, you just have to take a suture. So your planning in such cases is very, very important as to where you make an incision. So suppose you have a 24 cut RK or a 28 cut RK, you can go a little posterior, go scleral. Here I've gone corneal because I know that I have enough space between the 8 cut RK to place my keratome and go ahead and make my incision. So this is one precaution that you have to take during RK cuts. And I thank Anaga for this opportunity for sharing all my videos. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kumar. I'll just want you to tell the people who are listening. I think one of the things which is very underperformed, under-recognized is to do a touch-up of a refractive surgery on case of any patient where we are getting a refractive surprise. How often would you resort to that, or we are still apprehensive of doing that?
I'm not at all apprehensive. In fact, in the US, what they are doing nowadays, all premium IOLs are charged for LASIK and cataract at the same time. And if a touch-up is necessary, they just go ahead and do it. So I nowadays don't have a fear at all of a touch-up for my patients because with surface techniques there, excellent results and the pain almost gone in surface because of different drugs that are available in India. I am very strongly recommending that I tell all my patients, do not panic, do not worry, they have to have patience. And after 2-3 months of stability, we go ahead and do the procedure.
Yeah, because what I feel is that leaving a patient unhappy is a big disservice to your practice. So even if you have to you have not included in a package or whatever it is, a surface ablation or a touch-up can easily be done in these patients and they would be very happy. So what I normally do as a practice is that if there is a residual refractive error, I would say that, okay, I'm giving you a temporary glass, you wear it and see whether it obviates or takes away your symptoms and you become from an unhappy to a happy patient. And if the patient is happy with that, I will immediately go ahead and do a touch-up. Dr. Suhas, Dr. Sandeep, you have any comments on this?
No, before that, I just wanted Mahipal, what will be your cutoff before you do a refractive surprise? I mean, you do a surface treatment in a post multifocal. Like you have a patient with minus 0.5, 0.75. Would you do it or would you wait?
So that is exactly what I'm saying is that why I will give a trial to that particular patient as to how that patient feels, because at times the refractive error, an astigmatism of 0.5 diopters may not be worrying the patient, but the patient may be having other dysphotopsia. You have to look at the angle kappa or the angle alpha as you want to see and do an eye trace and see whether there are abrasions and other reasons for that, because purely simply doing refractive correction may not help the patient, but typically up to 0.5 I will leave behind. So it's only beyond 0.5, that means 0.75 and above I will do, because surface ablation is really something where things going wrong are very, very unlikely. Yeah. So Dr. Nagvekar, you want to have any comments?
Yes, for me also the cutoff would be about 0.75. If the patient has done one eye, then for the second eye, I would do the second eye first, do whatever adjustment I want. And then after 3 months, see whether the patient really desires a correction. Very often, if the patient is happy with the second eye, they don't want to touch the first eye. So only if it's very necessary, I would go and do a touch-up. Yeah, but if it's a large refractive error, yes. Like Umar said, I prefer surface treatment nowadays.
So all of you, how comfortable are you today with the modern generation of, I would say, the CRV or the trifocal lenses, using them for post-refractive surgery patients?
I'm very comfortable. I've done quite a few cases now with the extended range of vision lenses in post-LASIK patients. And I'm having very good results with the Vivity, which I'm using now currently.
Vivity may not be a problem. I haven't used Vivity, so I don't have any problem with Eyehance or maybe Vivity, because I haven't. That's fine. But what I'm asking is trifocals. I'm just asking that, would you do a Synergy for those particular patients? Would you do a Zeiss trifocal, Panoptic, something that actually the brand of trifocals? Are you still apprehensive about it? The contrast, etc., those kind of things, and how does the patient the dysphotopic phenomena that are there, because you're not working on a normal cornea?
Sure. Mahipal, first of all, I would like to use a trifocal or a multifocal or a bifocal in only those patients who demand. I mean, many of these patients who've undergone refractive surgery before, and somehow these myopes who've undergone LASIK before never want to wear glasses. So if ever I've implanted a multifocal lens, I try to first of all discourage them. But in case they insist, then yes, in the past I have used even the Restore lens in such patients. But I know that their quality of vision is not very good. But yet they are so adamant about not wearing glasses that they tolerate all these things. So if the patient has got it done from me, it's only because he insisted on having it done. Yes.
Yeah,
And explain all the.
My question is that when the patient asks you,
Yeah.
would you say, okay, you can get it done, or you would dissuade me? Kumar, Suhas,
Yeah,
anybody?
I dissuade them first of all.
Okay.
Yeah.
I personally done quite a few, but I would in fact, these patients want it. So there is no
Yes.
question of dissuading them, as what Sir said, Dr. Nagvekar. But so I would prefer to do an EDOF IOL in one eye. And if I'm falling short of an addition, I may do a Technis multifocal in the other eye, telling the patients that halos in one eye will be more. Surprisingly, they adapt quite well because they already adapted through that LASIK vision. And now with any of these other IOLs, yes, with the multifocal, we are reducing contrast, we are giving glare, we are giving halos, but they're quite happy because they are wanting to be spectacle independent. So this mix and match works quite well in my hands.
Okay, Suhas.
Yeah. No, what I would say is, because their desire is so strong to stay away from glasses, whatever little the issues they have with multifocal, they easily get over it. But then we have the CP lens, we have these wavefront modulated lenses, which can definitely be good. In fact, some of them do well with Eyehance or the new Alcon lens as well. But to me, the new lens from Johnson & Johnson Synergy really works good. But it's only if the patient has a strong desire for vision without glasses.